The clock strikes midnight, and a lone whistle pierces the fog-shrouded station. Welcome to the chilling tale of Miss Marple and the midnight train to nowhere. Grab a cup of tea, settle into your seat, and let the suspense unfold. If you're hooked on this mystery, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. Chapter 1. The whisper in the shadows as the autumn leaves swirled like forgotten secrets outside the quaint village of St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple sat by her fireside, knitting a scarf that seemed to unravel as quickly as her thoughts. She was no ordinary elderly lady. Her sharp eyes had unravelled more knots in human nature than in her wool. It was a quiet evening, much like any other, until a frantic knock echoed through her cottage door. Standing there, drenched from the sudden rain, was young Eliza Thorne, her face pale as moonlight. "Miss Marple, you must help me," Eliza gasped, clutching a crumpled telegram. "My uncle's vanished on the midnight train, and I fear it's no accident." Miss Marple invited Eliza inside, offering her a seat by the hearth and a steaming cup of chamomile to steady her nerves. Eliza, a spirited librarian from the nearby town of Ashford, explained how her uncle, Sir Reginald Thorne, a wealthy inventor known for his eccentric gadgets, had boarded the midnight express bound for London just 2 nights prior. The train, infamous for its foggy routes through desolate moors, had arrived at its destination without him. No trace, no luggage, no witnesses, or so the authorities claimed. "He sent this telegram from the station," Eliza said, handing it over. It read, "Boarding now. Secrets aboard. Trust no one." Right, Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Secrets, she knew, were like weeds. They grew in the dark and choked the truth. The village constable had dismissed it as a runaway case, suggesting Sir Reginald might have eloped or fled debts. But Eliza knew better. Her uncle was a man of routine, obsessed with his latest invention, a device he called the shadow listener, a peculiar earpiece that could detect whispers from afar, perfect for eavesdroppers or spies. He was paranoid lately, Eliza confided, muttering about rivals stealing his ideas. And there was that strange letter from a man named Victor Hale, demanding a meeting on the train. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her knitting needles clicking like a metronome. She recalled Hale from the newspapers, a shady businessman with ties to underground auctions of rare artifacts. Could this be connected? Intrigued, Miss Marple decided to investigate. The next morning, she donned her sensible tweed coat and hat, boarding the local bus to Ashford Station. The platform was a hub of gossip. Porters whispered about the ghost train legends, where passengers vanished into the mist, never to return. One elderly conductor, Mr. Wilkins, with a moustache like a broom, pulled her aside. "I saw Sir Reginald that night," he murmured. "He was arguing with a tall fellow in a black overcoat, looked like trouble. Then poof, gone after the whistle blew." Miss Marple pressed for details. The man had a scar on his cheek and carried a silver cane. Wilkins added that the train's compartments were oddly empty that run, save for a few regulars, a nervous vicar, a glamorous actress named Lila Voss, and a professor of antiquities, Dr. Elias Crowe. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple pieced together clues over afternoon tea with her friend Dolly Bantry. Dolly, ever the social butterfly, recalled Lila Voss from a London gala, rumoured to be a jewel thief in disguise. And Dr. Crowe, "He's been digging up old Roman sites, but whispers say he's after cursed treasures." Miss Marple's mind raced. Sir Reginald's invention could uncover hidden conversations, perhaps exposing a plot involving stolen artifacts. Eliza arrived with more, a hidden note in her uncle's study, sketching a map of the train's route with a marked spot in the moors, labelled Midnight Drop. As dusk fell, Miss Marple visited the Thorne estate, a rambling manor filled with gadgets and dusty tomes. In the library, she found a locked drawer forced open. Inside, blueprints for the shadow listener, with notes on Hale's betrayal. A chill ran down her spine. Someone had been here recently, Footprints in the garden mud led to the gate, size 11 boots, matching the description of the scarred man. Eliza trembled. "What if they're coming for me next?" Miss Marple reassured her. "Fear not, dear. The truth hides in plain sight, like a stitch in a pattern." That night, as rain pattered against the windows, Miss Marple sat up, unable to sleep. She replayed the details, the telegram's urgency, the empty train, the rivals circling like vultures. A sudden realization struck. Sir Reginald hadn't vanished. He'd been taken perhaps for his invention's power, to reveal secrets that could topple empires. But who was the mastermind? Hale, with his shady deals? Lila, the actress with a penchant for drama? Or Crow, unearthing more than history? The chapter closed with Miss Marple gazing at the moonlit tracks visible from the Manor Hill. Tomorrow, she would board the Midnight Express herself, delving deeper into the web. Little did she know, the shadows held more than whispers. They held danger. Chapter 2. The Midnight Express. The platform at Ashford Station was cloaked in a damp fog as Miss Marple stood waiting, her tweed coat buttoned against the evening chill. The Midnight Express loomed before her, its black engine hissing like a restless beast, its windows glowing faintly with amber light. She clutched her small valise, packed with essentials and a notebook for jotting clues. Tonight, she would retrace Sir Reginald's journey, hoping the train itself might whisper its secrets. As the whistle shrieked, she boarded, her heart steady, but her senses sharp, ready to unravel the mystery woven into the night. The carriage was sparsely populated, much like Mr. Wilkins had described. Miss Marple chose a seat in the third compartment, near a window streaked with rain. The velvet seats smelled of old tobacco and polish, and the dim lamps cast long shadows. She noted the passengers. A young man with a fidgety demeanour, scribbling in a ledger. An elderly woman knitting furiously, her needles clacking like a warning. And a tall figure in a hooded cloak, face obscured, sitting at the far end. The train lurched forward, cutting through the moors, its rhythm a hypnotic pulse that seemed to echo Sir Reginald's cryptic telegram. Secrets aboard. Trust no one. Miss Marple's first task was to observe. She strolled the carriage, feigning a search for the dining car. The young man, whom she overheard called Tommy by the conductor, was a clerk from a London bank, his ledger filled with numbers that seemed more coded than financial. The elderly woman introduced herself as Mrs. Pritchard, a retired governess, but her eyes darted nervously when Miss Marple mentioned Ashford. The cloaked figure remained silent, their presence unsettling, like a shadow refusing to shift. She memorized their positions, knowing even the smallest detail could crack the case. In the dining car, Miss Marple ordered tea, her excuse to linger. The waiter, a wiry man named Percy with a twitchy smile, chatted freely about the train's regulars. "Odd lot this run," he said, polishing a glass. "That actress, Lila Voss, was here 2 nights ago, all charm and no tip. And Dr. Crow, always muttering about his artifacts, sat right where you are." Miss Marple's ears pricked up. She asked about a tall man with a scar and a silver cane. Percy's face tightened. "I saw him, argued with someone in the luggage car, then vanished before we reached London." She pressed gently, but Percy clammed up, muttering about needing to check the kitchen. Returning to her compartment, Miss Marple noticed a scrap of paper under her seat, missed by the cleaners. It was a torn ticket stub, dated the night Sir Reginald disappeared, marked with a faint ink smudge, a symbol resembling a coiled snake. Her mind flashed to Victor Hale. Newspapers had mentioned his ties to a shadowy group fond of serpentine emblems. She tucked the stub into her notebook, her thoughts racing. Was this a clue to Hale's involvement, or a deliberate plant to mislead? The train rattled through a tunnel, plunging the carriage into darkness. A sudden scream pierced the air, coming from the next compartment. Miss Marple hurried toward it, her torch casting a thin beam. She found Tommy, the clerk, clutching his hand, blood seeping from a shallow cut. "Someone grabbed my ledger!" he stammered. came out of nowhere in the dark. The cloaked figure was gone, and Mrs. Pritchard claimed she'd seen nothing, her knitting needles still. Miss Marple examined the wound, clean, deliberate, not accidental. She bandaged it with her handkerchief, her calm demeanour soothing Tommy, though his eyes remained wild. Back in her seat, Miss Marple pondered the incident. The ledger's theft suggested someone feared its contents, perhaps codes tied to Sir Reginald's invention. She recalled the midnight drop from the map in his study. Could the moors outside hold a clue? She peered through the window, the landscape a blur of shadows and mist. A faint light flickered in the distance, brief but unmistakable, near where the map had marked a spot. Her pulse quickened. The train was nearing that point now. As the clock struck 1, the train slowed unexpectedly, brakes squealing. The conductor announced a brief stop for track maintenance, but Miss Marple sensed otherwise. Slipping into the corridor, she glimpsed Percy whispering with a man in the luggage car, tall, scarred, gripping a silver cane. Her breath caught. It was the man Wilkins had seen with Sir Reginald. She retreated before being spotted, her mind piecing together fragments: the snake symbol, the stolen ledger, the mysterious light. Were they converging on a single truth? The train jolted back to life, and Miss Marple returned to her seat, her valise now feeling heavier with responsibility. She sketched the snake symbol in her notebook, determined to uncover its meaning. The night was far from over, and the Midnight Express held more secrets than she'd imagined. As the train plunged deeper into the moors, she knew the next stop might bring her closer to Sir Reginald, or to danger. Chapter 3. Shadows on the moors. The Midnight Express rumbled on, its wheels clacking like a heartbeat through the desolate moors. Miss Marple sat poised in her compartment, her notebook open, the snake symbol sketched in careful strokes. The flickering light she'd glimpsed outside lingered in her mind, a beacon in the fog that hinted at secrets buried beyond the train's iron path. The sudden stop had sharpened her instincts. Something was afoot, and she intended to find it. With the other passengers distracted by the jolt of the train's restart, she slipped into her coat, determined to investigate the luggage car where she'd seen the scarred man. The corridor swayed as she moved, the dim lights casting her shadow long and thin. The luggage car was at the rear, past rows of locked compartments and the faint hum of conversation. She passed Mrs. Pritchard, now dozing, her knitting abandoned, and Tommy, who was scribbling furiously in a new notebook, his injured hand wrapped. The cloaked figure was still absent, their empty seat like a gap in a puzzle. Miss Marple's steps were silent, her presence unnoticed as she reached the heavy door to the luggage car. It creaked open, revealing stacks of trunks and crates bathed in moonlight streaming through a cracked window. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of oil. Miss Marple's torch swept the shadows, landing on a pile of bags marked with the initials R.T., Sir Reginald Thorns, untouched since his disappearance. She knelt, examining a leather satchel. Its lock was broken, and inside she found a small brass component, part of the shadow listener, etched with tiny gears. A noise, a shuffle of boots, made her freeze. She doused her torch and ducked behind a crate just as the scarred man entered, his silver cane tapping the floor. He was muttering to someone unseen, his voice low. "The drops tonight. No mistakes." A second voice, smoother, replied from the shadows. "Hale's orders. Get the device or we're done." Miss Marple's heart raced. Victor Hale was indeed pulling strings. The men rummaged through Sir Reginald's bags, cursing when they found nothing but papers and tools. Miss Marple clutched the brass component, her fingers trembling. It was proof the shadow listener was key to the mystery. But why? As the men left, she slipped the piece into her pocket, her mind racing. The midnight drop from Sir Reginald's map. Was it happening now, under the cover of the unscheduled stop? She needed to see the moors herself. Back in the corridor, she noticed the train slowing again, the brakes groaning. A glance out the window showed the same faint light, closer now, pulsing in the distance. She made a bold decision. She would disembark. Using the confusion of the stop, she slipped out a side door, her shoes sinking into the muddy moor. The fog was thick, curling around her like a living thing, but the light guided her. A lantern, swaying gently, held by a figure near a cluster of rocks. She crept closer, her breath shallow, until she could make out a man in a tweed cap, unloading a crate from a cart. It was Dr. Elias Crowe, the antiquities professor, his face grim as he worked alone. Miss Marple crouched behind a boulder, watching as Crowe pried open the crate, revealing glinting objects, Roman coins perhaps, or something more sinister. He muttered to himself, "Hale will pay for this, but not yet." The lantern flickered, and Miss Marple caught sight of a coiled snake emblem on the crate, matching her ticket stub. Her suspicions deepened. Crowe wasn't just digging up history, he was entangled in Hale's schemes. But where did Sir Reginald fit? Was his device meant to expose this illicit trade? A twig snapped under her foot and Crowe's head whipped around. Miss Marple held her breath, praying the fog hid her. He scanned the darkness, then resumed his work, loading the crate onto the cart. As he drove off, the train's whistle blew, signalling departure. Miss Marple hurried back, her skirt catching on brambles, and boarded just as the doors closed. Her heart pounded, but she was unscathed, the brass component still safe in her pocket. She returned to her seat, her mind a whirlwind of connections. Hale's orders, Crowe's crate, the snake symbol tying them together. As the train picked up speed, Miss Marple noticed Tommy watching her. His eyes narrowed. Had he seen her leave? She smiled politely, deflecting his gaze, but unease settled in. The luggage car encounter and Crowe's secretive actions pointed to a conspiracy larger than one man's disappearance. The shadow listener, she realized, could hear more than whispers. It could expose truths powerful men wanted buried. She jotted a note. Check Crowe's artifacts. Find Hale's motive. The moors faded behind her, but their secrets lingered, pulling her deeper into the night's enigma. Chapter 4. The Actress and the Veil. The Midnight Express thundered through the night, its rhythmic clatter a stark contrast to the turmoil in Miss Marple's mind. The brass component of the shadow listener weighed heavily in her pocket, a tangible link to Sir Reginald's fate, while the image of Dr. Crowe's clandestine activities on the moors burned in her memory. The snake emblem, the stolen ledger, the scarred man's whispered plans, all pointed to a web of deceit spinning tighter around the train. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her resolve firm. She would probe deeper, starting with the glamorous passenger whose name kept surfacing, Lila Voss, the actress, with a reputation as slippery as the fog outside. The dining car was quieter now, the hour late, with only a few passengers nursing drinks under the flickering chandeliers. Miss Marple spotted Lila at a corner table, her auburn hair gleaming under a velvet cloche hat, her fingers toying with a pearl necklace that seemed too extravagant for a train ride. Lila's eyes, sharp and calculating, met Miss Marple's as she approached, but her smile was practiced, dazzling. "Good evening, dear lady," Lila purred, gesturing to the empty chair. "Care to join me? This journey's dreadfully dull without company." Miss Marple accepted, sensing an opportunity to peel back the actress's polished veneer. Over a pot of Earl Grey, Miss Marple steered the conversation lightly, mentioning the train's eerie reputation. Lila laughed, a melodic sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, these old tales of vanishing passengers. Pure theatre, don't you think? I travel this route often for my performances in London. Nothing but fog and boredom." But Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in Lila's hand as she sipped her wine, and the way her gaze flicked toward the dining car door as if expecting someone. "You were here 2 nights ago, weren't you?" Miss Marple asked casually, her tone disarming. Lila's smile faltered, just for a moment. "Why, yes, a tiresome trip. I barely noticed the other passengers." Miss Marple pressed gently, mentioning Sir Reginald's disappearance, framing it as village gossip. Lila's reaction was subtle but telling. A tightening of her jaw, a quick glance at her reflection in the window. Poor man, she said airily. Probably wandered off at a station. These inventors are so absent-minded. But Miss Marple wasn't fooled. She shifted tactics, complimenting Lila's necklace, noting its intricate clasp shaped like a coiled snake. Lila's fingers froze on the pearls. A gift, she said quickly, from an admirer in the theatre world. Miss Marple smiled, filing away the connection to the snake emblem on the ticket stub and Crow's crate. The conversation was interrupted by the waiter, Percy, who approached with a tray of pastries. His twitchy smile was gone, replaced by a tense expression as he leaned close to Lila, whispering something about the package being ready. Lila nodded curtly, and Percy retreated. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Was Lila part of the midnight drop? She decided to test the waters. I heard there was quite a commotion in the luggage car that night, she said, watching Lila closely. The actress's composure held, but her eyes narrowed. Luggage cars are full of noise, trunks shifting, porters arguing. I wouldn't know. Her tone was too dismissive, too rehearsed. Miss Marple excused herself, claiming fatigue, but instead of returning to her compartment, she lingered in the corridor, hidden behind a curtain. She watched as Lila rose, slipping a small key from her purse and heading toward the rear of the train. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps muffled by the carpet. Lila entered a private compartment, one marked reserved, and closed the door. Through a crack in the curtain, Miss Marple saw her unlock a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a small safe. Lila retrieved a velvet pouch, checking its contents. A glint of metal, perhaps another component of the shadow listener. Before Miss Marple could see more, the train lurched, and she steadied herself against the wall, narrowly avoiding detection. Retreating to her seat, Miss Marple pieced together the clues. Lila's necklace, the whispered exchange with Percy, the hidden safe. All suggested she was more than a bystander. Was she stealing parts of Sir Reginald's device for Victor Hale, or playing her own game? The snake emblem tied her to Crow's crate and the ticket stub, but her role was unclear: courier, thief, or mastermind. Miss Marple recalled Dolly Bantry's gossip about Lila's rumoured jewel-thieving past. Could the actress be using her charm to smuggle artefacts, with Sir Reginald's invention as a prize? The train's whistle sounded, signalling an approaching station. Miss Marple glanced out the window, spotting a figure on the platform, a man in a black overcoat, his face scarred, leaning on a silver cane. He was scanning the train, his gaze intense. Lila emerged from her compartment, the velvet pouch tucked into her coat, and moved toward the exit. Miss Marple's instincts screamed to follow, but caution prevailed. Confronting Lila now could tip her hand. Instead, she noted the station's name, Blackmore Halt, a desolate stop near the moors where Crow's lantern had flickered. Back in her compartment, Miss Marple opened her notebook, adding Lila's actions to her growing list of clues. The actress's poise hid a nervous edge, and her connection to the snake emblem was no coincidence. The safe's contents, Percy's involvement, and the scarred man's presence suggested a coordinated effort. But the motive remained elusive. Was Sir Reginald alive, held captive for his invention's secrets? Or had he met a darker fate? Miss Marple's knitting lay forgotten. Her mind wove a new pattern, one of deception and danger. As the train pulled away from Blackmore Halt, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of Lila returning, her face pale, the pouch gone. Had she made a handoff, the scarred man was no longer on the platform, and the fog seemed to swallow the station whole. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the next step, confronting Percy about his role or tracking down Dr. Crow's artifacts. The night stretched on, each mile bringing her closer to the truth, or to a trap. She closed her notebook, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, ready for the next act in this deadly drama. Chapter 5. The Conductor's Confession. The Midnight Express swayed through the night, its wheels grinding against the tracks as if protesting the secrets it carried. Miss Marple sat in her compartment, the brass component of the shadow listener still hidden in her pocket, its cold weight a reminder of the stakes. Lila Voss's furtive actions in the private compartment and her disappearance with the velvet pouch at Blackmore Holt had deepened the mystery. The scarred man's presence on the platform, coupled with the snake emblem linking Lila, Dr. Crow, and Victor Hale, suggested a conspiracy that stretched beyond Sir Reginald's disappearance. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned her notebook. The waiter, Percy, with his whispered words to Lila, was her next target. His nervous demeanour hinted at more than just a servant's role in this drama. The dining car was nearly deserted now, the hour creeping toward 2 in the morning. The chandeliers swayed gently, casting shadows that danced like spectres across the polished tables. Miss Marple found Percy wiping down a counter, his movements jerky, his eyes darting to the door. She approached with her usual disarming smile, holding an empty teacup as a prop. "My dear young man," she began, her voice soft but firm, "this tea has gone cold. Might you fetch another pot, and perhaps a moment to chat? I do so enjoy hearing about the train's comings and goings." Percy hesitated, his fingers tightening on the rag, but he nodded. Fetching a fresh pot, as he poured, Miss Marple leaned in, her tone conversational. "You must see all sorts on this route. I heard there was quite a stir 2 nights ago. Passengers arguing, luggage misplaced." Percy's hand shook, spilling a drop of tea. "Just the usual, ma'am," he mumbled. "Folks get loud after a few drinks." But Miss Marple's gentle probing was relentless. She mentioned the scarred man, describing his silver cane, and watched Percy's face drain of colour. "I don't know him," he said too quickly, his voice cracking. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes kind but piercing. "Come now, Percy. You whispered to Miss Voss about a package, and I saw you near the luggage car when that poor man vanished. Secrets weigh heavy, don't they?" Percy's shoulders slumped and he sank into a chair, his twitchy smile gone. "You don't understand, ma'am," he whispered, glancing around as if the walls might listen. "I didn't want no part of it, but they paid me. Good money, more than I'd see in a year." Miss Marple sat opposite him, her hands folded, giving him space to unburden himself. Percy confessed that 2 nights ago a man, tall, scarred with a silver cane, had slipped him a wad of cash to keep quiet about a delivery in the luggage car. He called himself Mr. Kane, but I heard Miss Voss call him Victor. They were moving something heavy, a box or crate, to the moor stop at Blackmore Holt. Miss Marple's mind raced, connecting Kane to Victor Hale. "And Sir Reginald?" she asked gently. Percy's eyes widened. "The inventor. He was poking around that night, asking about his bags. I saw him head to the luggage car. Then Mr. Kane followed. Next thing, he was gone. I swear I didn't touch him." Percy's voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple patted his arm, her touch calming. "You've done right by telling me, Percy. But what was in the crate?" He shook his head. "I didn't look. Miss Voss said it was private, for a collector. But I heard her mention a device to Kane. Something about hearing things no one should." The shadow listener, Miss Marple thought, her suspicions confirmed. The device's ability to capture distant whispers made it a prize for thieves or spies. But Percy's story raised new questions. Was Sir Reginald taken to protect the device, or to silence him? And what was Lila's role, courier or conspirator? Miss Marple pressed Percy further, asking about Dr. Crow. "He's a regular," Percy said, "always carrying dusty books and odd trinkets. That night he was in the dining car, but he kept watching the door, like he was waiting for someone." Miss Marple noted this. Crow's presence at Blackmore Holt suggested he was more than a bystander. A sudden jolt of the train interrupted them, and Percy jumped up, muttering about his duties. Before he left, Miss Marple slipped him a shilling and a warning. "Stay clear of Kane, Percy. He's dangerous." Percy nodded, his face pale, and scurried off. Miss Marple returned to her compartment, her mind buzzing. The crate, the device, Hale's alias as Kane. It all pointed to a smuggling operation, with Sir Reginald caught in the crosshairs. But the snake emblem nagged at her. It was a signature, a mark of a larger network. She opened her notebook, sketching a timeline. Sir Reginald's argument with Kane, his disappearance, Lila's pouch, Crow's crate at Blackmore Holt. The pieces were forming a pattern, like a half-finished quilt, but gaps remained. She needed to know what was in that crate and why Lila had handed off the pouch. As the train neared its next stop, a small junction called Greywick, Miss Marple decided to search the private compartment Lila had used. The safe might hold more clues. Slipping into the corridor, she moved silently, her torch casting a faint glow. The reserved compartment was unlocked now, the door ajar. Inside, the safe was empty, but Miss Marple noticed a faint scratch on its edge. A snake emblem, etched hastily, as if marking territory. Her search was cut short by footsteps. She hid behind the door as Tommy, the clerk, entered, his injured hand clutching a new ledger. He glanced around, nervous, then slipped a folded note into the safe and left. Miss Marple retrieved it, her fingers steady. The note read, "Crow, deliver to Hale at Greywick. No delays." LV, her heart sank. Lila was coordinating with Crow, and Hale was waiting at the next stop. The train slowed, its whistle mournful in the night. Miss Marple tucked the note away, her resolve hardening. Greywick would be her chance to confront the players in this deadly game, or to fall into their trap. She returned to her seat, the brass component a silent promise to find Sir Reginald, alive or not. The moors outside seemed to whisper, urging her onward as the train plunged deeper into the dark. Chapter 6. The junction at Greywick. The midnight express groaned as it approached Greywick Junction, its brakes screeching like a warning in the fog-soaked night. Miss Jane Marple sat in her compartment, her fingers tracing the edges of the note she'd found in Lila Voss's safe. Crow, deliver to Hale at Greywick. No delays. LV. The words were a thread in the tangled web of Sir Reginald Thorne's disappearance, linking the actress, the antiquities professor, and the elusive Victor Hale, now known to her as the Scarred Man, Kane. The brass component of the shadow listener, still hidden in her pocket, seemed to hum with secrets, urging her to act. Greywick was her chance to catch the conspirators in motion, but the station's isolation, a lonely platform surrounded by bleak hills, promised danger as much as answers. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her mind sharp as a needle, ready to stitch together the truth. The train slowed to a halt, its whistle cutting through the silence. Miss Marple peered through the window, the platform barely visible through the mist. A single lantern swayed, casting a feeble glow on a figure waiting, a man, tall and lean, his silver cane glinting. It was Kane, or rather Hale, his scarred face unmistakable even in the dim light. Beside him stood a porter, not Percy, but a burly man with a cap pulled low, hauling a crate marked with the now familiar snake emblem. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was the delivery Percy had mentioned, and Lila's note confirmed Dr. Crow's involvement. She needed to get closer, but stepping onto the platform risked exposure. Instead, she decided to observe from the train, using its shadows as cover. Slipping into the corridor, Miss Marple moved toward the carriage's exit, staying low to avoid detection. The other passengers were restless. Tommy, the clerk, was scribbling again, his new ledger clutched tightly, while Mrs. Pritchard, the elderly governess, muttered about the train's delays, her knitting needles idle. The cloaked figure, absent since the tunnel incident, remained a ghost in her thoughts, their identity a nagging question. She reached the exit door, cracking it open just enough to hear voices outside. Hale's tone was sharp, impatient. "Crow, you're late. The buyer's waiting in London. Where's the rest of it?" A second voice, cultured but tense, Dr. Crow's, replied, "I've got what you asked for. The device is incomplete without Thorne's keypiece. You promised he'd be here." Miss Marple's breath caught. Sir Reginald was alive, or at least Hale and Crow believed so. The keypiece, had to be the brass component in her pocket. The heart of the shadow listener. She strained to hear more, but the porter interrupted, grumbling about the weight of the crate. "Heavy as sin, this one," he said. "What's in it? Gold." Hale snapped, "Mind your job, not the cargo." The exchange confirmed her suspicions. The crate held artifacts, possibly stolen, and the shadow listener was meant to protect or expose their trade. But why Greywick? And where was Sir Reginald? She needed a closer look. Waiting until Hale and Crow moved toward a shed at the platform's edge, she slipped out, her sensible shoes silent on the gravel. The fog was her ally, cloaking her as she crept toward the crate, left momentarily unguarded. She knelt, examining its rough wooden surface. The snake emblem was branded deeply, and a faint hum emanated from within, like a machine ticking softly. Her fingers brushed a loose slat, revealing a glimpse of metal, gears, wires, and something glinting like a gem. Not just artifacts, she realized, but a hybrid of ancient relics and modern technology, perhaps powered by Sir Reginald's invention. Before she could investigate further, footsteps crunched nearby, and she ducked behind a stack of barrels, her heart pounding. Hale's voice grew louder, now laced with anger. Lila swore she'd deliver the pouch. "If she's double-crossing me, she'll regret it." Crow's reply was calm but edged. "She's playing her part. The girl, Thorne's niece. She's asking questions. We need to move faster." Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Eliza was in danger, her inquiries in St. Mary Mead drawing unwanted attention. She cursed herself for leaving the young librarian alone, but there was no time for regret. The men's voices faded as they entered the shed, and Miss Marple seized the moment to slip back to the train, her mind racing with new questions. Was Lila betraying Hale, or was she a pawn? And what role did Eliza play in their plans? Back in her compartment, Miss Marple opened her notebook, her pen moving swiftly. She sketched the crate's contents, gears, wires, a gem, and noted Hale's mention of a buyer in London. The shadow listener's ability to capture whispers could expose their dealings, making Sir Reginald a threat they couldn't ignore. But Crow's words suggested he wasn't fully aligned with Hale. There was tension, a crack in their alliance. She recalled the note from Lila's safe, its curt tone implying urgency. Was Lila delivering components to keep Hale at bay, or was she orchestrating her own scheme? The train jolted forward, leaving Greywick behind. Miss Marple glanced at Tommy, who was now asleep, his ledger open to a page of cryptic symbols, circles, lines, and a faint, snake-like curve. She resisted the urge to examine it closer. He was too unpredictable, possibly a spy for Hale. Instead, she focused on Mrs. Pritchard, whose earlier nervousness now seemed suspicious. Approaching the elderly woman, Miss Marple offered a friendly smile. "Trouble sleeping, dear?" she asked. Mrs. Pritchard's needles resumed their frantic pace. "This train's full of ghosts," she muttered. "I saw that actress sneaking about, and that professor with his crates. Unholy business." Miss Marple nodded, probing gently. "Did you see them 2 nights ago, when the inventor vanished?" Mrs. Pritchard's eyes flickered. "I saw him, arguing with a man in a black coat. Then nothing, like he melted into the fog." The admission was small but vital. Mrs. Pritchard's observation placed Hale with Sir Reginald, corroborating Percy's story. Miss Marple thanked her, returning to her seat as the train plunged through a tunnel, its darkness mirroring her thoughts. The crate, the pouch, the symbols. They were pieces of a larger machine, one Sir Reginald had built and others sought to control. She considered her next move. Confront Lila about the pouch, or track Crow to his London buyer. Both were risky, but inaction was not an option. Eliza's safety and Sir Reginald's life hung in the balance. As the train emerged from the tunnel, a faint noise caught her ear. A soft tap, like metal on wood. It came from the overhead luggage rack. Standing carefully, she reached up, her fingers brushing a small box hidden behind her valise. It was locked, marked with a snake emblem, and bore the initials LV. Lila Voss. Her heart raced. Had Lila planted it to frame her, or was it another clue? She tucked it into her valise, deciding to open it later, away from prying eyes. The train's rhythm steadied, but the night felt alive with menace, each mile drawing her closer to a confrontation she couldn't yet predict. Chapter 7. The Locked Box. The Midnight Express hurtled toward London, its wheels singing a relentless song against the tracks. But Miss Jane Marple felt no closer to unravelling the knot of Sir Reginald Thorne's disappearance. The small locked box, marked with Lila Voss's initials and the snake emblem, now hidden in her valise, was a new thread in the tapestry of deceit. Its weight, both physical and metaphorical, pressed on her as she sat in her compartment, her notebook open to a fresh page. The brass component of the shadow listener, the note from Lila's safe, and the glimpse of Dr. Crow's crate at Greywick Junction all pointed to a conspiracy driven by greed and secrecy. But the box, its contents unknown, could be the key to exposing Victor Hale's plans or a trap set to ensnare her. With dawn still hours away, Miss Marple resolved to crack its secrets before the train reached its final stop. The carriage was quiet, the other passengers lulled by the late hour. Tommy, the clerk, slept fitfully, his ledger tucked under his arm, its cryptic symbols a puzzle she hadn't yet solved. Mrs. Pritchard's knitting needles had stilled, her snores soft but steady. The cloaked figure remained absent, their empty seat a silent taunt. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the valise at her feet, the box inside it calling to her like a whispered challenge. She needed a private space to examine it, away from curious glances. The washroom at the end of the carriage offered solitude, so she gathered her things, her movements deliberate to avoid suspicion, and slipped into the corridor. The washroom was cramped, its mirror fogged with condensation. Locking the door, Miss Marple set the box on the tiny sink, its surface cold and smooth, the snake emblem gleaming under the flickering light. The lock was intricate, a pin tumbler design that resisted her hairpin's probing. She frowned, recalling Sir Reginald's knack for gadgets. Had he designed this, or was it Lila's handiwork? Her fingers traced the initials LV, and a memory surfaced. Lila's pearl necklace, its snake-shaped clasp. Could the necklace be more than jewellery? She made a mental note to examine it if she crossed paths with the actress again. With no tools to pick the lock, Miss Marple tried another approach. She tapped the box gently, listening for clues to its contents. A faint rattle answered, a metallic clink like coins or small components. She shook it lightly, detecting a heavier object shifting inside, perhaps a stone or a tool. The box was a puzzle, but forcing it open risked damage. She tucked it back into her valise, deciding to seek help from a locksmith in London, unless she could confront Lila first. The actress's role was murky. Her note to Crow and the pouch she'd handed off at Blackmore Holt suggested she was a courier, but the box in Miss Marple's possession hinted at a deeper game. Returning to her seat, Miss Marple noticed a change in the carriage. The air felt charged, as if the train itself sensed the approaching climax. She glanced at Tommy, who was awake now, his eyes fixed on her valise. Had he seen her leave with it? She smiled at him, her expression benign, but her mind was alert. His ledger, with its snake-like symbols, might hold answers, but stealing it was too risky. Instead, she decided to test his involvement. "Trouble sleeping, young man?" she asked, her voice warm. Tommy flinched, his bandaged hand twitching. "Just restless," he muttered. "This train's got a bad feel tonight." Miss Marple nodded, probing gently. "I heard there was a theft a few nights ago, a ledger like yours. Dangerous things, papers, when they hold secrets." Tommy's face paled, and he clutched his ledger tighter. "Mine's just numbers," he said too quickly. "Bank work, nothing more." But his eyes betrayed him. Darting to the corridor where Lila had last been seen, Miss Marple let the moment pass, filing away his reaction. He was involved, perhaps a reluctant pawn, like Percy. The web was growing clearer. Hale, Crow, Lila, and now Tommy, all tied to the snake emblem and Sir Reginald's device. But where was the inventor? Crow's words at Greywick, "You promised he'd be here," suggested he was alive, held somewhere, perhaps even in London. The train's whistle sounded, signalling another stop. King's Hollow, a small station just outside the city. Miss Marple peered out, spotting a familiar figure on the platform. Lila Voss, her auburn hair catching the lantern light, speaking urgently to a man in a grey suit. The man was new, his face clean-shaven but his posture rigid like a soldier. Lila handed him a small parcel, not unlike the pouch from Blackmore Holt, and he slipped into the shadows. Miss Marple's instincts screamed to follow, but the train was already moving. She jotted a description of the man, tall, grey suit, military bearing, in her notebook, suspecting he was the buyer Hale had mentioned. Back in her compartment, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Dr. Crow. His crate, filled with gears and a gem, suggested he was smuggling more than artifacts. Perhaps a prototype powered by the shadow listener. She recalled his tense exchange with Hale, hinting at distrust. Could Crow be coerced, or was he playing a double game? She needed to find him, but the train's layout made it tricky. His compartment was in the next carriage, and she'd seen him there earlier, poring over a leather-bound book. With the train now speeding toward London, time was short. She gathered her courage, slipped into the corridor, and headed for Crow's compartment. The door was ajar, and Crow was inside, his face illuminated by a small lamp. Papers littered his table, maps and sketches of ancient sites, some marked with the snake emblem. He looked up as Miss Marple knocked lightly, her smile disarming. "Pardon the intrusion, Dr. Crow," she said. "I'm an amateur historian fascinated by your work. Might we chat about Roman artifacts?" Crow's eyes narrowed, but he gestured for her to sit. "Not much to tell," he said gruffly. "Just old coins and pottery." But Miss Marple's keen gaze caught a sketch on his table, a device with gears and a gem, eerily similar to the crate's contents. She steered the conversation to the train's history, mentioning Sir Reginald's disappearance. Crow's hand tightened on his pen. "Tragic," he said curtly. "People vanish on these moors. Nothing new." But his unease was palpable, and Miss Marple pressed further, mentioning the snake emblem as a curious design she'd seen in old texts. Crow's face hardened. "You're observant," he said, his voice low. "Some symbols carry weight. Best not to meddle." The warning was clear, but Miss Marple smiled undeterred. "Oh, I'm just a curious old lady," she said, rising. "Thank you for indulging me." Back in her seat, Miss Marple's mind raced. Crow's defensiveness confirmed his role, but his fear suggested he wasn't in control. Hale was the puppet master, with Lila and possibly Tommy as his strings. The locked box, still unopened, was her next step. She considered Percy's confession, his fear of Hale, and wondered if the waiter could be persuaded to help. As the train neared London, the lights of the city flickering on the horizon, Miss Marple felt the web tightening. The box, the device, the buyer, all were converging, and Sir Reginald's fate hung in the balance. She tucked her notebook away, her resolve unbreakable, ready to face the dangers awaiting in the city's shadows. Chapter 8. The London Labyrinth. The midnight express rolled into London's King's Cross station as the first hints of dawn painted the sky a bruised grey. Miss Jane Marple gathered her valise, the locked box with Lila Voss's initials, and the brass component of the shadow listener carefully concealed within. The train's final stop felt like a threshold, the city's sprawling chaos, a stark contrast to the fog-shrouded moors. Dr. Elias Crow's guarded warning, Lila's secretive handoff at King's Hollow, and the cryptic note tying them to Victor Hale pulsed in her mind. The snake emblem, now a recurring motif, marked a trail leading to a buyer in London, and perhaps to Sir Reginald Thorne himself. Miss Marple stepped onto the platform, her tweed coat blending with the early morning crowd. her senses alert for any sign of her quarry. The station buzzed with porters, travellers, and the clatter of luggage carts. Miss Marple scanned the crowd, spotting Lila Voss slipping through an archway, her cloche hat tilted to shield her face. Dr. Crow was nearby, lugging a heavy satchel, his eyes darting as if expecting pursuit. There was no sign of the scarred man, Hale, or the grey-suited buyer from King's Hollow, but Miss Marple knew they couldn't be far. Her plan was clear: follow Lila or Crow to the buyers' meeting, where the shadow listener's components and the mysterious crate might reveal Sir Reginald's fate. But first, she needed to unlock the box in her valise. A locksmith in London's winding streets was her best hope, and she knew just the place: a discreet shop in Covent Garden run by an old acquaintance, Mr. Finch. Navigating the station's exits, Miss Marple hailed a cab. Her destination, the labyrinthine alleys of Covent Garden. The driver, a cheerful man with a walrus moustache, chatted about London's fog and rising crime, oblivious to her focus. She kept her valise close, the locked box a silent passenger. At Covent Garden, the market was waking, stalls brimming with flowers and produce, their colours a stark contrast to the mystery's gloom. Mr. Finch's shop, tucked between a bakery and a bookseller, was a narrow storefront with a faded sign. Inside, the air smelled of oil and metal, and Mr. Finch, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, what brings you to my humble lockworks?" he said, wiping his hands on an apron. She produced the box, its snake emblem glinting under the shop's gaslight. "A delicate matter, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice low. "I need this opened, but discreetly." Finch's eyes widened at the emblem, but he asked no questions, setting to work with a set of fine tools. As he probed the lock, Miss Marple recounted her findings in her mind: Hale's smuggling operation, Lila's role as courier, Crow's artifacts, and Tommy's coded ledger. The box, she suspected, held a piece of the shadow listener, or evidence of a larger crime. Finch's tools clicked, and the lock sprang open with a soft snap. Inside lay a crystal lens etched with tiny circuits and a folded letter. Miss Marple's heart raced. The lens was clearly part of Sir Reginald's device, designed to amplify its eavesdropping power. The letter, in a hurried scrawl, read: "Lila, secure the lens. Hale must not know. Deliver to E at the Raven's Nest, midnight." R.T. Miss Marple's breath caught. Sir Reginald's initials. He was alive, or had been when the letter was written, and working against Hale. The Raven's Nest, she recalled, was a shadowy tavern in Whitechapel, known for underhanded deals. E could be Crow, or someone new, perhaps the grey-suited buyer. She thanked Finch, slipping him a few shillings, and tucked the lens and letter into her pocket. The box now empty, but its secrets alive. Leaving the shop, Miss Marple blended into the market crowd, her thoughts racing. The lens confirmed the shadow listener's value, a device that could hear whispers across rooms or even cities, a tool for spies or thieves. Hale wanted it, but Sir Reginald's letter suggested Lila was defying him, possibly to protect her uncle. Yet her actions, handing off parcels, planting the box, hinted at duplicity. Miss Marple needed to find the Raven's Nest, but first she followed a hunch. Crow's satchel at the station suggested he was headed to deliver his crate. If she could track him, she might intercept the buyer. She hailed another cab, directing it to the British Museum, where Crow often lectured. The museum's grand steps were quiet, but a side entrance showed signs of recent use. Mud tracks, a discarded cigarette. Inside, the halls echoed with silence, the artifacts looming like silent witnesses. Miss Marple slipped past a guard, her footsteps soft, and found Crow in a basement archive, his satchel open, papers strewn across a table. He was arguing in hushed tones with the grey-suited man from King's Hollow, whose military bearing was now unmistakable. "Hale's impatient," the man said. "The lens is missing, and the girl's sniffing around." Crow snapped. "Eliza's no threat. Focus on the crate. It's ready for the nest." Miss Marple ducked behind a display case, her heart pounding. Eliza's name sent a chill through her. The young librarian was in deeper danger than she'd feared. The crate, now visible in a corner, hummed faintly, its snake emblem stark against the wood. The grey-suited man, whom Crow called Elliot, checked his watch. Midnight, then. No mistakes. They left, and Miss Marple approached the crate, her torch revealing more gears and a second gem, larger than the one in Crow's crate at Blackmore Holt. The shadow listener wasn't just a listening device. It was part of a machine, perhaps a weapon blending ancient relics with modern tech. She left the museum, her mind a whirl of connections. The Raven's Nest meeting was hours away, giving her time to warn Eliza. She telephoned St. Mary Mead from a nearby booth, reaching Dolly Bantry, who promised to check on the girl. "She's been frantic, Jane," Dolly said. "Found more of Reginald's notes, something about a serpent's code." Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to Tommy's ledger. The snake-like symbols might be the key to decoding it. She needed to return to the station, where Tommy might still be, but the city's dangers were closing in. As she stepped into the street, a black car idled nearby, its driver hidden behind tinted glass. Miss Marple's instincts flared. She was being watched. She slipped into an alley, doubling back through the market to lose any tail. The lens in her pocket felt heavier, its circuits a map to Sir Reginald's survival. The Raven's Nest loomed as the final stage, where Hale, Lila, Crow, and Elliot would converge. She checked her watch, 6 hours until midnight. The city's labyrinth was alive with threats, but Miss Marple's resolve was ironclad. She would face the serpent's den, lens in hand, to save Sir Reginald and unravel the truth. Chapter 9. The Serpent's Nest. The fog clung to London's streets like a shroud as Miss Jane Marple made her way toward Whitechapel. The crystal lens of the shadow listener tucked securely in her coat pocket alongside the brass component. The letter from Sir Reginald Thorne, directing its delivery to the Raven's Nest at midnight, burned in her memory, its implications clear. He was alive, plotting against Victor Hale and relying on Lila Voss to protect his invention, the snake emblem etched on crates, tickets. And now her mind marked a conspiracy weaving through Dr. Elias Crow, the grey-suited Elliot, and the nervous clerk Tommy. With Eliza Thorne's safety in question and the mysterious machine in Crow's crate hinting at a larger threat, Miss Marple knew the Raven's Nest would be the crucible where truths and dangers would collide. The city's pulse thrummed around her, but her focus was unwavering as she approached the tavern's grimy door. Whitechapel's alleys were a maze of shadows, the air thick with coal smoke and the tang of cheap gin. The Raven's Nest crouched between a pawnshop and a shuttered butcher, its sign, a blackbird clutching a snake, swaying in the wind. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, her appearance that of a harmless old lady, but her eyes were sharp, scanning for signs of Hale, Lila, or Crow. The tavern's windows glowed dimly, and muffled voices leaked through the cracks. She slipped inside, the door creaking, and was met with a haze of tobacco and the clink of glasses. The patrons, dock workers, petty thieves, and shadowy figures in booths paid her little mind, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes. Choosing a corner table near a cracked mirror, Miss Marple ordered a pot of tea, her prop for blending in. The barman, a burly man with a scar across his knuckles, served her with a grunt, his gaze lingering too long. She sipped slowly, her senses attuned to the room. At a far booth, Dr. Crow sat alone, his satchel at his feet, his fingers drumming nervously. The crate from the museum was absent, likely stashed nearby. Lila Voss entered moments later, her auburn hair hidden under a scarf, her movements quick as she scanned the room. She didn't see Miss Marple, but her eyes locked on Crow, and she slid into his booth, whispering urgently. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching fragments. Hale's delayed, Elliot's impatient. The lens? Her heart skipped. The lens in her pocket was the prize they sought, and Lila's words confirmed her duplicity. She was playing both sides, delivering components to Crow while keeping Hale in the dark. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the letters E, likely Elliot, the buyer, not Crow. She needed to intercept their exchange, but the tavern was a powder keg, and one wrong move could ignite it. The barman passed by, his scarred knuckles brushing a concealed bulge under his apron. A knife, or worse. Miss Marple's instincts flared. He was no mere server, perhaps Hale's enforcer. The clock above the bar ticked toward midnight, and the door swung open, admitting the grey-suited Elliot, his military bearings stark against the tavern's grime. He joined Crow and Lila, his voice low but commanding. "The machine's incomplete without the lens," he snapped. "Thorne's useless if he won't talk." Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Sir Reginald was alive, held captive, his knowledge of the shadow listener's design their leverage. Crow's reply was tense. "I've got the core, the gems calibrated. We need the lens to activate it." Lila's voice was sharp. "I told you it's coming." "Patience, Elliot." Miss Marple clutched her teacup, her mind racing. The machine, gears, gems, and the lens was a hybrid, possibly a surveillance tool or something more sinister. She needed to act. Slipping a hairpin from her hat, she palmed it, ready to pick a lock or defend herself if needed. Her plan was to get closer, perhaps by feigning a stumble near their booth. But a new figure entered, shattering her focus. It was Tommy, the clerk, his bandaged hand clutching his ledger, his face pale with fear. He hesitated, then approached the booth, his voice trembling. "Hale sent me. He wants the ledger. Says it's the code." Elliot's eyes narrowed, and he snatched the ledger, flipping through its pages of cryptic symbols. Miss Marple's earlier hunch was right. The serpent's code Eliza mentioned was in Tommy's notes, likely the key to the shadow listener's operation. The tension in the booth was palpable. Lila stood, her scarf slipping, revealing the snake-clasped necklace. "Hale's not here," she hissed. "We stick to the plan." But Crow grabbed her arm, his voice low. "You're holding out, Lila. Where's the lens?" Before she could answer, the barman approached, his hand on the bulge under his apron. "Enough chatter," he growled. "Boss wants it now." Miss Marple's heart sank. Hale was closer than she'd thought, perhaps watching through a proxy. She needed to move, but the tavern's exits were guarded by rough-looking men, their eyes fixed on the booth. Improvising, Miss Marple rose, clutching her valise, and shuffled toward the bar, feigning confusion. "Oh dear, I've lost my way," she said loudly, drawing eyes. The distraction worked. Lila glanced over, and Miss Marple caught her eye, holding it for a moment. Lila's expression flickered, a mix of recognition and fear. Miss Marple dropped her handkerchief near the booth, bending to retrieve it, her fingers brushing the satchel at Crow's feet. It was heavy, likely holding the machine's core. She straightened, her face serene, but her mind catalogued the satchel's weight and shape. As she returned to her table, the barman's gaze followed her, and she knew her time was short. The clock struck midnight, and the booth's conversation grew heated. Elliot slammed the ledger shut. "The code's useless without the lens. Find Thorne, or we're all dead." Miss Marple's mind raced. Sir Reginald was hidden, likely nearby, his life the final bargaining chip. She needed to find him before Hale did, but the tavern was a trap, its exits watched. Slipping the lens into her sleeve, she prepared to leave, but a hand gripped her arm. The barman, his scar glinting. "You're asking too many questions, old lady," he said, his voice low. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "Just looking for the ladies' room, dear," she said, her smile disarming. He hesitated, then released her, muttering about keeping out of trouble. She moved toward the door, her valise heavy with the empty box and her notebook. Outside, the fog swallowed the street, but she sensed movement, a car idling, its headlights dim. Hale, she suspected, waiting for his prize. The Raven's Nest had revealed the players. Lila's betrayal, Crow's machine, Elliot's impatience. Tommy's code. But Sir Reginald's location remained the final piece. Miss Marple slipped into the night, the lens her trump card, determined to find the inventor before the serpent's jaws closed. Chapter 10. The Final Whistle. The fog of Whitechapel swirled around Miss Jane Marple as she slipped away from the raven's nest. The crystal lens of the shadow listener hidden in her sleeve, its etched circuits a silent promise to uncover Sir Reginald Thorne's fate. The tavern's revelations, Lila Voss's duplicity, Dr. Elias Crow's machine, Elliot's impatience, Tommy's coded ledger, and Victor Hale's looming presence had woven a tapestry of deceit. With the snake emblem as its sinister thread, Sir Reginald was alive, held captive for his invention's secrets, and the serpent's code in Tommy's ledger was the key to unlocking the machine's power. With midnight past and London's streets alive with danger, Miss Marple knew the final act was near. The lens, the brass component, and her notebook were her weapons, and she would wield them to save Sir Reginald and expose the conspirators before the night ended. Her first task was to find a safe place to regroup. The black car idling near the tavern, likely Hale's, had forced her into the alleys, where gaslights flickered like wary eyes. She recalled a small boarding house in Whitechapel, run by a Mrs. Gibbs, a friend of Dolly Bantry's, where she could plan her next move. Navigating the labyrinthine streets, Miss Marple kept her valise close, the empty box with Lila's initials a decoy if searched. The boarding house was a modest brick building, its parlour warm with the scent of lavender and coal. Mrs. Gibbs, a stout woman with a kind smile, welcomed her without questions, offering a room and a pot of tea. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Miss Marple," she said, but Miss Marple only smiled, her mind on the lens and the code. In her room, Miss Marple spread her clues on the bed. The brass component, the crystal lens, the letter from Sir Reginald, and her notebook, filled with sketches and timelines. The letter's mention of the Raven's Nest and E pointed to Elliot, the grey-suited buyer, but Tommy's ledger held the serpent's code Crow, and Elliot needed to activate the machine. She opened her notebook, studying the snake-like symbols she'd copied from Tommy's ledger at King's Cross. They were a cipher, intricate but not unbreakable, resembling a substitution code she'd seen in her nephew's cryptography books. With a pencil, she began decoding, pairing symbols with letters based on frequency. Hours ticked by, the city's hum fading until a pattern emerged. Vault, Thames, Serpent's Lair. Her heart raced. The Serpent's Lair was a location, likely a hideout where Hale held Sir Reginald. The Thames ran through London's heart, and a vault suggested a secure, hidden place, perhaps a warehouse or bank. She recalled a newspaper article about Hale's dealings in smuggled artifacts, linked to a riverside warehouse in Wapping, known for its underground vaults. It was a gamble, but the lens and the code pointed there. She needed to act before Hale retrieved the lens from Lila, or realized she had it. Tucking the components into her coat, she left a note for Mrs. Gibbs to contact Dolly Bantry if she didn't return, then hailed a cab to Wapping, the lens her beacon in the dark. The warehouse district was a maze of looming buildings. The Thames, a black ribbon under the moon. Miss Marple's cab dropped her near a dilapidated structure, its sign faded, but bearing a faint snake emblem. The air smelled of salt and rust, and distant shouts of dock workers masked her footsteps. A side door, half ajar, led to a stairwell descending into darkness. She gripped her torch, its beam cutting through the gloom, and followed the stairs to a steel door marked with the same serpent symbol. Voices echoed beyond. Hale's sharp tone, Lila's defiant retort, and a weaker voice. Hoarse, but familiar. Sir Reginald. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. She eased the door open, slipping into a vast vault lit by flickering lanterns. Crates lined the walls, some open, revealing artifacts, Roman coins, jeweled daggers, and gears like those in Crow's crate. In the center, Sir Reginald sat bound to a chair, his face gaunt but defiant, his shadow listener blueprints scattered on a table. Hale stood over him, his silver cane raised while Lila argued, her necklace glinting. "You promised me a cut, Victor," she snapped. "The lens is gone. Someone took it." Crow and Elliot were there too, the latter clutching Tommy's ledger, his face grim. Tommy himself stood in a corner trembling, his role as a reluctant courier clear. Miss Marple hid behind a crate, her mind piecing together the final threads. Hale's operations smuggled artifacts, using the Midnight Express as a cover, with the Shadow Listener as the ultimate prize. A device to eavesdrop on rival gangs or governments, its crystal lens amplifying signals through ancient gems. Lila had been tasked with securing the lens, but hid it in the box to double-cross Hale, hoping to sell it to Elliot, a rival buyer. Crow, coerced by debt, built the machine, while Tommy's ledger held the activation code. Sir Reginald, refusing to cooperate, had been kidnapped to force his compliance. The Serpent's Lair was Hale's vault, the heart of his empire. She needed a plan. The lens in her sleeve was her leverage, but confronting Hale directly was suicide. Instead, she used the vault's acoustics, tapping the brass component against a pipe, the sound echoing like a signal. Sir Reginald's head lifted, his eyes sharp. "The listener!" he gasped, drawing Hale's attention. In the confusion, Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Mr. Hale, I believe you're missing this." She held up the lens, its circuits catching the light. Hale's scar twitched, and he lunged. But Lila, seizing her chance, grabbed his cane, tripping him. "You're finished, Victor!" she shouted, her loyalty shifting. Chaos erupted. Elliot drew a pistol, aiming at Lila, but Crow tackled him, desperate to save his own skin. Tommy bolted, dropping the ledger, which Miss Marple scooped up. Sir Reginald, using the distraction, worked at his ropes, his inventor's hands deft. Miss Marple tossed the lens to him, shouting, "Finish it!" He caught it, slotting it into a device on the table, a prototype shadow listener. It hummed to life, amplifying Hale's earlier threats, recorded by its circuits. "Kill Thorn if he resists." The vault's speakers blared the confession, freezing everyone. Miss Marple seized the moment. "The police are on their way," she lied, her voice steady. "Your empire's done, Mr. Hale." Hale snarled. But Sir Reginald, now free, activated the device's full power, broadcasting Hale's words to a hidden receiver, likely Eliza's, in St. Mary Mead. The police, alerted by Dolly Bantry, were indeed closing in, their sirens faint but growing louder. Hale lunged for Miss Marple, but Lila, redeeming herself, struck him with the cane, knocking him out. Crow and Elliot surrendered, their alliance crumbling, while Tommy wept, confessing his forced role. As the police stormed in, Miss Marple handed over the ledger and components, explaining the plot. Sir Reginald, weak but alive, thanked her, his inventions safe. Lila, repentant, admitted her greed, while Crow and Elliot faced arrest. The Snake Emblems network was exposed, its artifacts seized. Back in St. Mary Mead, Eliza embraced her uncle, her courage vindicated. Miss Marple sat by her fireside, knitting once more, the Midnight Express a memory. The truth, like her stitches, had held firm. If you've enjoyed this tale, dear viewers, grab a cup of tea and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Comment below with your favorite twist and join us for more mysteries.